Welcome back, everyone. It's really good to see everybody working together on the ideas and things. And I'm really curious to hear about what the discussions that come out of these sessions are, because it seems like I can feel the energy in the room. It's really, really good. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the roving reporters, David, Denise, James, Fiona, and their wonderful facilitator, Julie Phillips from Disability Advocacy Victoria. So over to you all. Yep.
I certainly know the group I was in. I don't know if we failed with our question answering, but so we might start at the furthest end. David.
Yes. Hi, I'm Dave. So the most difficult question we had was what's working well.
And we're justice. You're justice, aren't you, David?
Yes, I'm justice, legal system. Is that better? So the most difficult question we had was what's working well, because we struggled to find many things that were working well, but we did, because we're positive thinkers, we did come up with that there are pockets of good practice in the legal and justice system, but it's inconsistent. And there was some support for the intermediary program that's doing some good work, but isn't universally available or widely available. So that was the sort of good part. There were, I probably could have filled a couple of pages of things not working well. Some of them, the first one, there'll be a big shock to everyone in this room, is that there's not enough access to advocacy support, either legal advocacy or disability advocacy. I know we're all shocked by that. Again, we talked about, the table talked about not enough access to supports to keep people out of the criminal justice system. The legal aid isn't very accessible. Even if you can get legal aid, the process isn't very accessible for people with disabilities often. Not enough support for people with disabilities at risk of offending and becoming involved in the criminal justice system. We also talked about that the law is really complex and confusing. So we've heard lots of talk today, and we hear lots of talk about nothing about us without us, and people with lived experience being important in the process. But if you think about court proceedings, I've sat supporting people with disabilities in child protection cases in the court. And the whole premise of that is they should sit there and shut up and listen to people from child protection say horrible things about them and not have a voice to respond to that. And you see the frustration build up in people, and that system isn't very well attuned to allowing people to have a voice and to fairness even from them. Because even if their lawyer speaks for them at some point, the lawyer's probably speaking in legal jargon. And so they don't necessarily perceive anybody as speaking for them against these horrible things from their point of view that are being said about them by the other side. So that is a really intractable problem as well. Access to police and justice system, a lack of physical access and a lack of access to interpreters is really problematic. If you don't have access to understand what's going on and what's being said, then it's pretty hard to feel like you might get a fair go from that system. And even we talked about that people with disabilities are excluded from joining Victoria Police. And so where's the diversity within the police force? So that was a problem we identified as well. And I'm sure I missed some other good things, but hopefully they're all written down.
Did we come up with any ideas for improving things in the future, apart from, and I'm talking about myself, just whinging about the things that weren't working?
Well, clearly more access, more advocacy funding, I think, was high on the list that'll be well supported in this room.
What a coincidence.
Yes.
Okay, James from AMIDA, would you like to talk about the housing situation?
Oh, not really, but yes. There are quite a few tables looking at the housing, and in terms of what's working well in housing, it was really going for the crumbs at the bottom of the biscuit barrel. But there were a few people that I guess took a bigger picture view and really noticed the attitudinal changes that are happening in the sector. So even though we're not seeing results, we're not really seeing pathways to results, we're seeing the seeds of change starting. The National Housing and Homelessness Plan the NDIS and the SDA and SIL funding increasing access for some people that wouldn't have had access before. So there are like the beginning of change, which is nice to acknowledge. In terms of what's not working well, how long have you got? There were a lot of details that people pulled out, things like choice being very, very limited in terms of the housing stock that people have access to, the quality of the housing, the accessibility of the housing, the locations of the housing. What's not working well, this idea of good enough, of building to a silver level instead of a gold level, as opposed to looking at what good enough really means. And one thing that I kind of want to focus on in terms of what's not working well is the relationships between the people using the service and the people providing the service. That there really is this adversarial culture, this us and them culture, when really we're all in the same crappy boat, to use the lifeboat analogy still. We're all in the same crappy boat, but the landlords, the housing service providers, the disability housing providers are not showing empathy to the people using the system, which creates major frustration in the people using the system. And then our conversations become quite tense and quite heated. People are looking for difference as opposed to looking for common ground. And nothing's ever going to resolve when that's at the heart of the relationship. In terms of what needs to happen to achieve inclusion in this system, the guys from this table over here, REAC and ADEC, and I'm sorry, the other people, I didn't mention where you're coming from, had some really good points in terms of government stepping up and being a bit smarter in how they apply rent assistance, in terms of stepping up and holding housing providers, be they private rental providers or public, holding them to accountability, having some legislation, some course for enforcement, and penalties for people who don't do it the right way or do it the wrong way. The tables talked about the idea of improving the stock that we have, improving the quality of things that we have. And really at the root of what everyone's talking about is this idea of relationships. Of if we have a good relationship, there's hope that things can change. And at the moment we have terrible relationships. There's no communication, there's no hope. And you know, that's really at the root of what can change.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I know we've been doing this conference for, I reckon, about 10 years. And then there's some, I think Melanie Muir, she often uses this frame, crusty old advocates, but you get the picture, some of us that have been working for decades. And yet one of the things that you mentioned is working well is we've got the seeds of some plans that hopefully if things work out well, they might give us some good results. So you just have to wonder, don't you, how many decades you have to wait and when will we be at a conference when we can actually say, well, here's the list of what's working well. Isn't this great? Doesn't look like we're there yet. Anything else you wanted to say, James?
Just I hope I represented the tables well.
Yep. Fiona, advocate extraordinaire.
Yeah. So apologies to the last table. I talked too much and I know I was supposed to listen, but, you know, can't help myself.
Your mental health and wellbeing?
Yes. So struggled again to find what was working well, but did come up with a couple. So telehealth during COVID. It was free, so that was good, but now it's not free anymore, so it's sort of gone downhill a bit, but it has at least alleviated some of the waiting lists and given some people choice. Knowledge of support is better than it was 10 years ago. It's a little bit better. So somebody said therapy assistance. I can't quite remember what that was about, but therapy assistance has improved. Use of support workers, having access to support workers is something that didn't happen 10 years ago. I suppose that's that one. What's not working well? Yeah, how long have you got? As you said, I think somebody said that. So yeah, access to specialists. appropriate specialists, training of specialists. It's costly and it's very, very long, and it can be soul destroying, and it actually exacerbates conditions in the process. So yeah, waiting lists were horrendous. Hard to find services, particularly in, well, everywhere actually, it's hard to find services. So I know somebody that lives in Melbourne has difficulties finding services. So yeah, but actually the training of specialists, there's a gap there in some of the psychosocial disabilities where they tend to stereotype disabilities. There's a lack of training about comorbidities, multiple disabilities. So that's a really big gap. Focuses on diagnosis too much is another area. Cost, I've already said that. Whole of, not dealing things with a whole of life experience. So just focusing on one particular disability and not the whole thing and how they interact with each other. So there's a lack of knowledge in that. It was felt. Lack of leadership. There doesn't seem to be enough leadership leading disability services. What still needs to happen to achieve disability inclusion in the system? One of the things that kept coming up was respect for advocacy. So there seems to be a lack of understanding of what advocacy is and therefore respect for it. There's a myth that's going around from when I started 15 years ago that we're ranters, and that's it, just overly emotional. We tend to be female a lot of the time, so therefore, it's misogynistic as well. So, there is a lack of respect. We're not really paid and we're not really resourced well. We need to work more collaboratively instead of, turf wars. I put that one in. Can't help it, sorry. I just think that there's this divide and conquer, and there's this fighting for resources because we're poor, resource poor, and we need to actually collaborate and work together and share our knowledge so that we have more chance of success. Compulsory and measurable disability and cultural training, that's, it has to be mandatory and it has to be measurable. Cultural awareness training I put in because it's not mandatory, and at the moment I feel it's just box ticking and there's no accountability for it. People tend to get sent to it if they've shown some lack of understanding, but it's like a get out of jail free card, send them on a cultural awareness course. So it's not just the police force, it's everywhere. So I think it should be mandatory and it should be accountable. I don't know what anyone else thinks of, but I did. Consistency in implementation of ideas. People come up with great ideas and policy backs it up, but then it fades, nothing happens. So it needs to be consistently implemented and monitored, I suppose. Inclusive technology needs to improve. We need to normalise disability more. Intersectionality was another one. So I think that comes in with the multiple, the whole of life thing. You need to look at the big picture, the individual. So don't stereotype. Everyone has a different experience and different needs. So I don't think I've forgotten anything.
Lovely. Thank you, Fiona. And Denise, lucky last, you had family violence, right?
Not personally, but yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, I had the privilege of listening into the two groups that were focused on family violence. I'll keep it mercifully short. It's not a subject I know a great deal about, but my education went up exponentially in the last hour. I think what's working well was that there was an acknowledgement that the practice managers is working well, and the ability of advocates to be able to refer people that they're working with into Orange Door. So that was really seen as a positive. And that so the focus on what's working well was quite short. What's not working well obviously took up a lot of time. So I think if I was to summarize it, I would say that it's fractured, confused, and inconsistent in its approach to working with women with disabilities or people with disabilities experiencing family violence. I think there's a sense that women who have a disability and who are also experiencing family violence are seen as someone else's problem. The problem is whose. So it's not clear where they're supposed to go. There's suddenly a sort of like, oh, it's not, that's not for us. Oh, that's for somebody else. And also it seemed, I heard across the two tables that there seemed to be, that it's still not a strong, we can hear it starting to bubble up in the media now, but there's not really clear recognition of the problem, the probably quite strong problem, I would say, of coercive control, particularly when it comes to plan nominees. Who has oversight of the plan nominees? And I can certainly talk from experience from one case that we had at STAR there was a very clear case of coercive control going on there. And the devastating consequences that that can have for the person with disability when particularly a family member that they're supposed to love and trust is the perpetrator of that particular form of violence. That's probably something that does need some investigation. In terms of what needs to happen, probably more, better access for us as disability advocates into the various services and an ability to refer to more than just Orange Door. At the moment, particularly if you're working, give an example, an area that I know I work in and others in the room, child protection. You can't refer people into one of the services like McKillop Family Services that has to go through child protection. It's very difficult to get to commission reports. I know this from our advocacy work for women with disability, intellectual disability and child protection. You get like child protection have their favorite neuropsychs and they'll send people off to get those neuropsych assessments, often very damning, very deficiency based, and that can be a real problem. That's possibly useful for getting your NDIS plan, but it's not very useful when you have to go to the children's court and explain that, well, yeah, those are the areas that I need help with. And that's the help that I'm seeking to get through my NDIS report. All the magistrate has in front of them is a damning report from child protection backed up by a neuropsych report that says this person is a risk to their child. So that's a real problem. And we as advocates are not yet able to do anything about that. So it's a real area that we need to work on, particularly because those women are often family violence survivors. So what do we do about that? How are they able to get the supports they need? We also talked about accreditation and training for disability advocates. That's something that is clearly coming down the pipe for us all. And I would say that just personally, I think that's a good thing. I think we should go there because, excuse me, I think if we want agencies and service providers to be educated on who we are and what we do and the value of what we do, we need to be able to show that we are properly accredited and trained and maintain our accreditation through CPD. So I think that's something that we need to look at, but that does then open up a discussion with state government for disability advocates across the sector about what is the formula by which our funding is provided. We're not a volunteer sector anymore, we're professionals. So let's have a look at it through that lens. And if we think of ourselves as professionals and we go and talk to other people, service providers, agencies, businesses as professionals, then that opens up a conversation about, well, this is actually what we do. These are the standards by which we do our work. And that then elevates our work above what Fiona was talking about, the sort of like the ranty emotionals to the the rational advocate, which is probably the direction that we're heading in. Plenty more that we could say, but I know we're short on time. And I did forget at the very beginning to say, hello, it's Denise speaking for the signers. I'm sorry about that. I'll just mark myself down on that one immediately. Thank you.
There's a giant slide behind you, Denise, with a giant picture of you and your name, so don't worry. Well, look, thanks everyone, and thanks for contributing to that. It's hard at the end of the day to get a bit of enthusiasm happening, but we got a lot of good feedback. The fact that it was mostly negative, we'll just put that to one side, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and look forward to seeing you at the next conference to hear what work you've been doing. Thanks. And thank you to our roving reporters.
Thank you very much, everybody. What a day. It's been incredibly energizing having you all in the room again. And I personally am inspired by the number of people with lived experience, disability advocates, allies, community sector workers, public servants here today that are clearly deeply committed to ensuring that our mainstream services are inclusive of people with disability. We know that there are huge barriers to overcome. There's so much change about to be handed down to us on a national and state level. We're waiting for the Disability Royal Commission findings to come down. We're waiting for the NDIS review outcomes. We're waiting to see how our state governments are going to adjust, change and respond to this, and how we as a sector are also going to respond. We know it's not going to be easy, but united we stand, divided we fall. And today I feel like we're standing united. We may have different views, but we all have the desire to do better, be better, and see people with disabilities be genuinely included in our state. But what is abundantly clear in spades today is the value of the disability advocacy sector. I feel very privileged to work alongside 24 different disability advocacy organisations, their CEOs, managers, and their frontline advocates. I have the privilege of learning from these giants every single day. Every day I see the value of their work, the big wins when they have banded together to work towards responding to the many issues that have recently cropped up around the state. Transport and education are some of the things that come to mind. But what is really important is the wins that no one hears about. When their advocacy has supported a person with disability to get out of an unsafe situation, or win a discrimination case, or become empowered to turn around and advocate for themselves. Disability advocates fly under the radar, supporting people with disabilities with so many things above and beyond their role, and the outcomes are critical to the quality of the lives they help change. Today's lightning round and your feedback, input and ideas for reform are not just going to sit there for a discussion point and an activity. The DAO team is committed to taking this away and doing some analysis of this work and developing up some messaging and issues papers that can be given straight back to all of you, disability advocates, to use in your own advocacy. So when we can help you to do your amazing work, we will, and we certainly exist to serve you. So I would like to extend a thank you to NAB for providing a fantastic venue today, Auslan Services and Expression Australia for interpreting and captioning services today, Accent Media for video, and Nico Cannon for photography, and my incredible colleagues at VCOS and DAO for your amazing work across many hours, days and weeks to make this day happen. And most importantly, thank all of you, presenters, facilitators, reporters and participants today for your incredible participation, your leadership and your energy today. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as our team has. Safe travels, everybody, and go well.